I never thought a simple DNA test would unravel the very fabric of my life. That was the thought that consumed Emma O'Connell as she stared at the results on her phone, her hands trembling. The small town of Fairfax, Pennsylvania, was all she had ever known. Nestled between rolling hills and surrounded by fields that seemed to stretch on forever, Fairfax had a way of making everything feel eternal. The leaves had just begun their descent, painting the streets with rich autumn hues, and a chill had crept into the air, signaling the change of seasons. For Emma, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher, this was home. A place where time moved slowly, and every corner was familiar. Raised by a close-knit family, Emma prided herself on her roots and her legacy, a legacy that had been passed down through generations. A dependable, kind-hearted woman, Emma believed in the importance of tradition and history. But when a DNA test, suggested by her friend James out of mere curiosity, arrived with results that didn't align with everything she knew about herself, her world began to shake. The discovery that her bloodline wasn't as clear-cut as she had always assumed would set off a chain of events that would challenge her sense of identity. Emma, who had always been certain of who she was, found herself questioning everything. Her desire for stability and belonging clashed with the truth she now faced. The peace of Fairfax, with its tight-knit community and unchanging rhythms, could no longer shield her from the truths waiting to be uncovered, and the warmth of family would soon be overshadowed by an unexpected revelation. It started with a simple notification. Emma O'Connell was at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, when the email arrived. It was from the company that had processed her DNA test results. "Your ancestry results are ready," it read, accompanied by a bold, eye-catching link. It had been nearly 2 weeks since she'd sent off the test, and the anticipation of seeing her family tree laid out in percentages had been building. Her friend James had encouraged her to do it, teasing her about how cool it would be to find out if there was anything unexpected in her background. Emma, however, never expected it to lead to anything significant. After all, she had always known her heritage: Irish, Scottish. The O'Connell name ran deep through the streets of Fairfax. She clicked on the link, her fingers lightly brushing the screen. A few moments later, the results loaded, and at first, everything seemed normal, until it didn't. Instead of the familiar Irish and Scottish breakdown she expected, the results listed ethnicities and regions she had never heard of. There was a significant portion of her heritage that traced back to Eastern Europe, a surprising mix from West Africa, and even some Asian ancestry. The most shocking of all was the match with a person named Marcus Granger. The name sounded foreign, unfamiliar, and the app described him as a close relative. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. "This has to be a mistake," she muttered to herself. She reread the results, hoping they were a glitch. The system couldn't be right. The O'Connells were deeply rooted in Fairfax. Her whole life had been defined by their presence in this town, their legacy, their history. There had to be a mistake. Her breath quickened as panic started to rise. The notion of her family's legacy, something she had always taken comfort in, was slipping from her grasp. Emma grabbed her phone and immediately called James, her closest friend and the one who had convinced her to take the test in the first place. "James, you need to look at this," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't possible." She explained what she had seen, her words coming in bursts. He responded with concern, trying to reassure her, but Emma's mind was racing. She had to know more. Who was this person? How could her bloodline be so different from what she had always known? "Maybe you should talk to your parents," James suggested, his voice cautious. "They might know something." Emma nodded, though a wave of dread washed over her. She felt as though her whole life, her very identity, was being questioned. As the shock of the discovery settled in, she knew she couldn't ignore it. There were answers waiting to be uncovered, and whether she was ready or not, she had to face them. The foundation of her family, her entire life, was about to change. The next few days after receiving the DNA test results were nothing short of a whirlwind for Emma. The unease that had settled in her chest only deepened as she tried to reconcile the results with everything she knew about herself and her family. It was as though the very foundation of her identity had been ripped from beneath her, leaving her scrambling to find answers. She spent the first night tossing and turning, her mind racing through countless possibilities. She thought of her mother and father, the ones who had raised her with love and discipline. Could they have known about this Granger connection? Why hadn't they ever mentioned anything that could explain the discrepancies in her genetic makeup? She couldn't stop herself from imagining the worst-case scenario. Was she really their biological child? Were her parents hiding something monumental? The following morning, after a restless night, Emma called her mother. There was a tightness in her voice, a hesitation she couldn't shake. Her mother answered the phone as if nothing was amiss, asking about her day, but Emma couldn't make small talk. "Mom, we need to talk. I got my DNA test results back, and there's something I don't understand." "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Her mother's voice softened in concern, but Emma could hear the hesitation in her tone. I found someone named Marcus Granger in the results. He's listed as a close relative." Emma felt her pulse quicken, the words hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. "Why haven't you ever mentioned this name before? What's going on?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Emma could almost hear her mother trying to gather her thoughts, to decide how to respond. Finally, she spoke. "Emma, this isn't something I ever wanted to tell you. Your father and we didn't know how to explain it. It's a long story, and one that might hurt." Emma's heart sank. "What do you mean? What's going on, Mom?" Her mother sighed heavily. "You need to come home. There's so much I need to tell you. It's better if you hear it from me in person." Emma's mind was spinning as she set the phone down, her thoughts racing. 1,000 questions swirled around her, and each one felt like a betrayal. She couldn't wait to hear the truth, but she also wasn't sure she was prepared for it. She had to go to her parents' house. She had no choice. Arriving at her childhood home, Emma was greeted by the familiar scent of cinnamon and fresh-baked bread, the comforting feeling of being back in the place where she had spent her whole life. But today, that comfort felt like a mask, hiding something dark underneath. As she stepped inside, her mother was waiting for her in the living room, looking older than Emma remembered, her face drawn with worry. Emma sat down, feeling the weight of the moment. "Mom, please," Emma said, her voice trembling. "What happened? What do I need to know?" Her mother sighed and looked away, as if gathering the courage to speak. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I should have told you a long time ago. You see, Marcus Granger is your half-brother. Your father and I had a very difficult time before you were born. There was a brief period when I was involved with someone else. Marcus's father, well, he's your biological father, Emma." Emma felt the room tilt beneath her feet. The floor seemed to shift as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. Her mouth went dry, and she stared at her mother, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. What? What do you mean? Why didn't you tell me?" Her mother's face was filled with regret. "I was afraid. Afraid of how you would react. I didn't want to hurt you, Emma. We decided that it was best for you to grow up with your father, and we kept the truth from you. I didn't want this to affect your life. But now, with the DNA test results, you deserve to know." The words swirled in Emma's mind, but they didn't quite sink in. She was trying to grasp the magnitude of what had just been revealed. She wasn't just Emma O'Connell. She was Emma Granger too. A piece of her life had been missing all these years, and now it had been exposed in the most shocking way possible. In the days that followed, Emma tried to process what she had learned. She went to work, teaching her class as though nothing had changed, but inside she was torn. She could no longer ignore the burning questions that weighed heavily on her heart. What would it mean for her future? Should she reach out to Marcus Granger? Was there even a place for her in the Granger family? James, her best friend, became her sounding board during this period of confusion. He listened patiently, offering his support as Emma wrestled with the reality of her situation. "I think you should meet him, Emma," James urged. "You don't have to dive into the past, but if you're feeling this way, it might help. You might find some peace. You can't move forward until you know more." Emma felt both drawn and terrified by the idea of meeting Marcus. She wasn't sure she was ready to face a half-brother she had never known existed, but she knew that the uncertainty would never go away unless she took the step to understand the truth. And so she took the plunge and reached out to Marcus. To her surprise, he agreed to meet with her. When they met at a coffee shop in Philadelphia, Emma was overwhelmed. Marcus was older than she expected. Tall, with a quiet confidence that suggested years of business success. They sat down, both unsure of how to begin, their conversation tentative at first. "Emma, I'm not sure what to say," Marcus began. "I never knew about you, and when I saw your name come up in my DNA results, it was a shock. But after speaking to my father, I found out the whole story." Emma's heart was racing. "What story?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "My dad, he and your mom were together a long time ago," Marcus said, his eyes softening. "But things fell apart before you were born. I was raised by my father, and I didn't know anything about you. I'm not sure why your mother kept it a secret, but I can only imagine how hard it must be for you now." For the first time in days, Emma felt a glimmer of understanding. Marcus wasn't an enemy. He was just another person caught in the web of her family's complicated past. The walls that had separated them for years were slowly coming down, and as they continued to talk, Emma began to feel a sense of connection with Marcus she hadn't expected. But the journey wasn't without setbacks. As Emma continued to explore her newfound family ties, she encountered resistance from her father, who refused to speak about the past. "It's over, Emma," he snapped one evening, his voice harsh. "Let it go. You don't need to know anything about that family. We're your family." The rejection stung. Emma had always admired her father's strength, but now she saw a different side to him. The anger and pain he carried from the past had shaped their family in ways she hadn't realized. She felt torn between the two families, her biological family, which had been kept a secret from her, and the one that had raised her, which seemed intent on keeping her in the dark. But as the weeks went by, Emma learned to navigate these tensions. She found small victories in her growing relationship with Marcus, in the quiet moments of understanding between them. She discovered that she didn't have to choose one family over the other. Instead, she could embrace both parts of her identity and begin to build her own sense of self. The stakes were rising, and Emma was beginning to see the complexity of the situation she had found herself in. But the journey was far from over. The deeper she delved into her family's past, the more questions arose, and the more her own identity seemed to shift with every answer she uncovered. Emma was learning that life wasn't as simple as she had once believed. It was messy, complicated, and full of unexpected twists, and she had no choice but to face it head-on. The day Emma O'Connell had been dreading finally arrived. After weeks of grappling with the shocking truth about her family's hidden history, she was forced to confront the hardest decision of her life. The quiet town of Fairfax, Pennsylvania, had always been a place of comfort and safety for Emma, but now it felt like a prison, a place where the walls were closing in and nothing felt familiar anymore. Her father, who had grown increasingly distant and cold since Emma's discovery, had invited her over for dinner. This wasn't the usual warm family gathering she had grown accustomed to. This was something far more tense. There were unspoken words in the air, thick with unresolved feelings, and Emma knew it was time to face the truth. As much as she wanted to avoid the confrontation, she couldn't escape it any longer. It was time to ask the questions that had been burning in her mind ever since the DNA test results arrived. When Emma stepped into the kitchen, her father stood by the stove, stirring something in a pot. The smell of roasted chicken and vegetables filled the air, a stark contrast to the heavy silence between them. Her mother was sitting at the table, eyes lowered, as if she were bracing herself for the storm she knew was coming. "Emma," her father said, his voice stiff, as though he were struggling to find the right words. "I'm glad you came. There's a lot we need to discuss." Emma nodded but said nothing. She felt the familiar tension between them, the quiet, unspoken resentment that had been building ever since she'd uncovered the truth about Marcus Granger. Her heart pounded as she sat down at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. Her father finally spoke. "I know you've been meeting with Marcus. And I know you're angry with me." His voice grew more distant. "But you need to understand, Emma. There's a reason we kept this from you. A reason I couldn't tell you about your real father." Emma's eyes flashed with emotion, her breath quickening. "You kept it from me? For how long, Dad? My entire life? How could you do that?" Her father's face hardened, and he turned away from her, his back stiff. "I was trying to protect you. That man, Marcus's father, was never the kind of man you needed in your life. I thought it was better if you never knew. But I had a right to know." Emma's voice broke, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. "I'm not just your daughter. I'm not just O'Connell. I have a right to know who I am, where I come from." Her father's eyes darkened. "You are my daughter, Emma. You've always been. I raised you, I gave you everything. And now you're going to throw that all away over some DNA test." Emma stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm trying to understand why you lied to me. Why did you hide this from me for so long? What was so terrible about Marcus's father that you had to erase him from my life?" The words hit her father like a blow. He turned to face her, his expression full of anger and guilt. "It wasn't just about him, Emma. It was about what it would do to your mother, to our family. Do you have any idea what kind of person he was? He wasn't fit to be a father. I couldn't let you grow up knowing that man's name, knowing what kind of man he was." Emma was trembling now, her voice shaking. "But I wasn't asking you to raise him. I just wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know who I am." Her father's face softened slightly, but the bitterness still lingered. "You don't get it, Emma. The truth is messy. It's painful. I didn't want you to carry that burden. I thought if you never knew, you would have a better life." For a moment, there was silence. The truth hung in the air like a thick fog. Emma's mind was racing, the pieces of her life crashing together in a way that she could never have predicted. She had spent so many years looking for answers, and now that she had them, the weight of the truth was unbearable. Her relationship with her father, the foundation of her life, was built on a lie. And Marcus, her half-brother, was a part of her history that she couldn't deny, no matter how hard she tried. But the hardest part wasn't the discovery of her past. It was the betrayal she felt from her father. The man she had trusted most had hidden the truth from her, and now she didn't know if she could ever look at him the same way again. "Emma," her mother said softly, breaking the silence, "please understand. We did this because we loved you. We never wanted to hurt you. We wanted you to have a happy life, a life where you didn't have to deal with the past." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But you didn't give me a choice, Mom. You kept me in the dark. You took away my right to know who I am." Her mother reached out to her, her hand trembling. "I'm sorry, Emma. I wish I could go back and change things, but I can't. I never meant to hurt you." Emma pulled away from her mother's touch, her heart heavy with anger and sorrow. "I need some time to think," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of her emotions hit her all at once. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure of whether she should leap or turn back. The family she had known her entire life was now a stranger to her, and the world she had built around them felt shattered beyond repair. Emma drove aimlessly through the streets of Fairfax, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she fought to keep herself composed. She had so many questions, so many feelings she didn't know how to process. Was she supposed to forgive her parents? Could she? Would the truth ever be enough to heal the wounds they had caused? Her mind kept circling back to Marcus. The connection she had felt with him during their last meeting had been so real, so raw. He was a stranger, yes, but he was also a part of her, and the idea of shutting him out seemed impossible. She needed answers from him, not just to understand the past, but to find out what kind of relationship they could have moving forward. The time had come for Emma to make a choice, whether to continue living in the shadow of her family's secrets or to embrace the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. It was a decision that would shape the rest of her life, and Emma knew there was no turning back. As the rain began to fall, Emma pulled over to the side of the road, her mind made up. She reached for her phone and dialed Marcus's number. She was ready to face whatever came next. After weeks of turmoil, Emma O'Connell had come to terms with the truth. Her family was not what she thought it was. The DNA test had revealed that Marcus Granger was her half-brother, and this revelation had shaken her entire world. Her father had kept this secret for years, and now Emma was left to piece together the truth of her identity. The confrontation with her parents had been emotional, but it led Emma to a decision. She would face the truth, no matter how painful. Emma reached out to Marcus again, determined to build a relationship with the half-brother she never knew existed. Despite the awkwardness and tension, Marcus welcomed her with open arms. Over time, Emma met his extended family, people who had no idea she was part of their history. While some moments were tense, they shared a common bond that began to bridge the gap between them. Marcus became a pillar of support for Emma as she navigated her complicated new reality. Her parents, initially resistant to the idea of Emma building a relationship with Marcus, gradually began to accept the truth. Emma's father, after much reflection, reached out to Marcus to apologize and make amends. He acknowledged that his decision to hide the truth from Emma had been wrong. Slowly, the family began to heal. though things would never return to the way they once were. Emma had to learn to forgive, not only her parents but also herself, for holding on to resentment. Emma's journey had transformed her. She entered it as a person looking for answers, but through her experiences, she became someone who understood the complexity of family, how love, pain, and history all intertwined. She no longer needed her parents' approval to define her identity. She had learned to embrace her truth, her newfound family, and the imperfections that came with them. In the weeks that followed, Emma and Marcus's relationship deepened. They spoke about their shared past and what the future could look like. They were no longer strangers. They were family. Marcus became her connection to a part of herself that had been hidden, and through him, she learned to embrace her full identity. Emma's parents, though strained, came to understand that they had failed her, not because they didn't love her, but because they tried to protect her in ways that weren't helpful. They reached out to Marcus and his family, slowly building a bridge to a new version of family. While the healing process was far from easy, the willingness to move past old hurts allowed them to move forward together, even if their relationship was never the same. The final scene takes place on a summer evening at Emma's childhood home. She stands outside, looking at the house that had once felt like a sanctuary. Her parents are inside, sharing a quiet moment, and for the first time in a long time, Emma feels at peace with where she is. Her phone buzzes with a message from Marcus. "Dinner at mine next Sunday? I'll bring the family. You bring yourself." Emma smiles, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. She walks into the house where her parents are waiting, and for the first time, she feels a sense of closure. The pain of the past will always be a part of her, but now she can embrace the present and the future with open arms. Family isn't just about bloodlines. It's about the relationships we choose to nurture. And Emma had learned to choose love, truth, and connection over resentment. As Emma walks into the light of the kitchen, the camera lingers on her face, a quiet moment that symbolizes the beginning of her new life. The journey she started to find the truth had turned into a journey of healing and acceptance, teaching her that sometimes the truth can tear us apart, but when we face it, it has the power to bring us back together.